It's a question that recently, right after the Arctic Council Ministerial was asked to our Minister for the Arctic Council, Ms. Glukak. And her answer in that context was the following. The Ottawa Declaration, which is the declaration that established the Arctic Council in the first place, was very clear that for the Arctic nations, the Arctic Council was established as a forum for Arctic cooperation. And the words that she said after that was, "This does not change." And she repeated that later in the interview as well. And I think that if you look at the comments that all of the Arctic countries have made in the last couple months, that's a very consistent theme. We all see this as a really important area of the world for cooperation, and we want to keep it that way. And I would answer it in a couple of different ways. The first is that the Arctic already has a very sophisticated and developed governance structure. The land territories of Arctic nations are governed, obviously by the sovereign laws of those countries. The Arctic Ocean is governed by a very sophisticated, developed set of international jurisprudence that's known as the UN Law of the Seas. And so we already have, in terms of an overall governance structure, quite a clear structure governing the Arctic. The second part of the answer, I think, has to do with how the Arctic Council itself is structured. And it's a unique organization. There's no other regional organization in the world that combines sovereign states. So we have the 8 Arctic states with 6 indigenous organizations that also have a seat at the table and are an integral part of that consensus decision-making process. And from a Canadian perspective, this unique nature of the Arctic Council is very, very important. 50% of our population, our northern population, is indigenous, more than 50%. And we find this as sort of a priceless part of how the Council works, and we don't want to lose that. At the same time, we recognize that observers have a lot to contribute. And Italy's front and center as one of those observers who has and continues to make a really valuable contribution. We have a very good working relationship with Italy. We recently signed an agreement, a bilateral agreement in November, to encourage more cooperation in terms of Arctic science. And very recently in April, in fact, the members of the Arctic Council and observers sit down on an informal basis and also talk about how we can make this organization more effective. So certainly we want to work with observers. We recognize the really valuable contributions observers have, but we don't want to lose the essence of what this organization is for us. Again, I would respond with comments that our Minister Glukak made following the Arctic Council meeting. And for her, we had a very wide range of priorities as chair of the Arctic Council. But the ones that really stuck out in her mind were the ones that were focused on improving the well-being of Northerners. And in that way, there's a few things that for us were particularly important. So the Arctic Economic Council was something that really was given some impetus because for us and for Northerners in Canada, economic development is an important issue. Mental health issues are also important, and that's something where we were able to give some impetus to it. Languages, Arctic languages, and one of the things that we're, I think, particularly proud of is the increasing importance that's being given to traditional knowledge. And just to give you an example of what that means in a concrete way, because often you might hear about traditional knowledge and you wonder what exactly does it mean. Inuit have many, many words for ice. They have a very sophisticated sort of understanding of ice, different kinds of ice, how ice changes over time, and what the implications are for people walking on it, for hunting, all of those kinds of things. So it's taking that knowledge that people have developed over a long period of time and combining it with what we know from a science perspective. So there's a lot, I think, that we can learn. We're proud of these different initiatives. There's also been some really interesting work done in terms of climate change, seeing what we can do in that field as well. So for us, the real essence has been focusing on Northerners themselves that the region be seen, that we see the region as, it's not something that's acted on by forces outside the region. What we're trying to do is something that the North is for Northerners, and we want to make sure that the development of that region really responds to their needs and their concerns, and that's been really important. And I think what I think we're happy about is when we look at what the Americans are planning to do under their chairmanship, there's also a real recognition about the importance of putting Northerners right at the center of that discussion as well. The question often comes up, and it comes up, it's not just from an oil and gas perspective, but we hear about the great shipping potential in the North, and there's often when you read about the Arctic, it's from the lens or from the perspective of some new possible economic boom, whether it's tourism, shipping, oil and gas, and there's others as well. And I think part of what it's important to keep in mind is these things are cyclical. So just specifically in terms of oil and gas, we had a major development in terms of, believe it or not, northern oil and gas in Canada in 1920. And then we had another great sort of surge of interest in the 1970s, 1980s. And then, more recently, a few years ago, there was another big surge of interest. These things are cyclical. What's important, again, is that the kind of development that takes place there really respond to the needs of Northerners. It's not just responding to, national projects or, the need for natural resources. It's a type of development that responds to the needs of those populations themselves. And we have a really good example, we have a couple of good examples in Canada of how that development is happening in a way that is responsive and respectful for the needs of local populations. As climates are changing, one of the issues that's come up in an additional area, for instance, is fisheries. What about being able to fish there? And it's an issue that's of real interest, but not just from the perspective of big fleets going in and fishing, but what are the possibilities for communities that are dealing with climate change and the impact and looking for other sources of livelihood? So it's something that we're looking at very closely. One of the things, and sometimes you have potentially conflicting kinds of things that you have to look at. One of the decisions we took fairly recently was to impose a moratorium on fishing in the Beaufort Sea, because we want to be able to look closely at those kinds of issues, the environmental impacts, and make sure, and this is a decision taken jointly with Indigenous communities, that it's something that's of benefit. When you look at the creation of Nunavut, which is our most recent large sort of territorial addition to Canada, when the Inuit negotiated the creation of this vast territory in 1999, one of the things that they negotiated was ownership of very important mineral deposits. So they bought the best experts they could find, the best geologists that they could find. They hired them, and they were able to choose as part of that settlement the best diamond, gold, iron ore deposits in the territory. And they're in control of that development. So there's a recognition that economic development is important, but economic development at a certain speed and in a way that's controlled by Northerners themselves. Italy has played a really constructive role within the context of the Arctic Council, and more generally on Arctic issues. One of the issues that they've really helped on is conveying very clearly. One of the things that's important when we look at the role of observers in the Arctic Council is having a sense of understanding the values and the values and the priorities of Northerners themselves. And Italy, through its representation at the Arctic Council, Ambassador Tormenta, your ambassador in Canada as well, have been very effective at conveying a sophisticated and a sincere knowledge and interest in what's happening in the Arctic, and the importance of that development for Northerners themselves. We also, as I mentioned before, have a really good collaboration at the research level, and we're in the process of creating some new installations in our own north. for Arctic research. And so we're really looking forward. We just had a teleconference with the executive director of that center, and very much he wanted to reinforce the desire to work with Italy and with Italian researchers, with your CNR, with your National Research Council. We have a very good relationship there.